Did you know that for a few brief weeks in 1945, the world felt like a party that everyone was invited to, except for half the guests? You can almost picture it now, the black and white newsreels flickering to life. In London, you see crowds climbing the statues in Trafalgar Square, a sea of smiling faces and waving flags. In Paris, you hear the joyous ringing of church bells that had been silent for years. And in New York, you watch as ticker tape rains down on Times Square, a blizzard of paper celebrating the end of a long, dark nightmare. Victory in Europe. The Great War, the one that had torn a continent apart, was finally over. The monster had been slain. But as the champagne flowed and strangers danced in the streets, a different story was unfolding on the other side of the planet. A story written not in ticker tape, but in sweat, blood, and fear. Just before we dive in, please take a second to tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's the single best way to support our work and ensure you never miss a new story. We're always curious, so let us know in the comments what part of the world you're in and what time it is for you. You are standing in the middle of 1945. The air in the West is filled with a collective sigh of relief, a deep, soul-shaking exhalation of pent-up anxiety. For millions, the return of fathers, sons, and husbands was no longer a desperate hope, but a coming reality. You can feel the optimism, the belief that the worst is behind you. It's a powerful and intoxicating feeling. Even the future Queen of England, Princess Elizabeth, famously slipped out of Buckingham Palace with her sister to join the celebrating crowds, a small, human detail in a world-changing event. But this feeling of victory has a boundary. It stops somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There, the war is not a memory. It is a suffocating, present-tense reality. The enemy is not a fallen dictator in a bunker, but an entire nation that appears willing to fight to the very last person. The Allied war machine, which had been focused on Europe for so long, now performs a slow, ponderous pivot. Men and machines that had just fought their way across France and Germany are being rerouted, sent from one inferno to another without so much as a pause. The maps in the war rooms have changed. Cities like Berlin and Rome are replaced with names that sound alien to most Western ears. Places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, for the soldiers, sailors, and Marines in the Pacific. The party in Times Square might as well be happening on another planet. Their world is not one of celebration, but of grueling, island-by-island combat. A brutal slog through volcanic ash and dense jungle against an enemy that simply would not break. Historians still argue about the mindset of Japan's high command at this point. Were they truly delusional, believing they could still win? Or were they engaged in a cold, brutal calculation to make the coming invasion of their homeland so costly, so terrifyingly bloody, that the Allies would be forced to offer a negotiated peace? What was clear to the men on the front lines was that this war was getting harder, not easier. A world held its breath, caught between a victory already won and a final battle that threatened to be the most horrific of all. The war getting harder is no longer an abstract idea on a map. You feel it in the gentle, sickening roll of the transport ship beneath your feet. The air, once clean and salty, now carries the metallic temps of diesel fumes and nervous sweat. You are one of thousands of young men, packed shoulder to shoulder, staring at the hazy silhouette of an island on the horizon. That island is Okinawa. To you, it is simply the next objective, another piece of land to be taken. But to the generals and admirals, it is the final stepping stone, the last stop before the mainland of Japan itself. This will be the largest amphibious assault of the entire Pacific War, a concentration of naval power that dwarfs even the Dété landings in Normandy. From the deck of your ship, you watch as the horizon erupts in fire and smoke. The pre-invasion bombardment has begun. The big guns of the battleships behind you are speaking, trying to soften a target that you will soon learn is anything but soft. You feel the ramp of the landing craft drop into the churning turquoise water. The sound is a deafening roar of engines and shouting and explosions. But as you wade onto the beach, an eerie quiet falls. The resistance you expected isn't there. This is a new, terrifying Japanese tactic. They have learned from previous battles. Instead of trying to stop you at the water's edge, they have turned the entire island into a fortress, a labyrinth of death that will bleed you white. The fighting, when it begins, is not a battle of sweeping maneuvers. It is an intimate, brutal affair. You move from one muddy ridge to the next, from one cave to another. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere, dug into a complex network of tunnels and bunkers. The island itself becomes a character in this nightmare. You see ancient stone structures, like the magnificent Shuri Castle, a symbol of Okinawan culture for centuries, turned into a heavily fortified command post. A place of beauty is transformed into a place of slaughter. You also see the faces of the local Okinawan people, caught in the crossfire of a war they did not ask for. Tens of thousands of civilians will perish in the fighting, a tragedy that is often lost in the military statistics. The battle for Okinawa grinds on for 82 days, a relentless soul-crushing crawl. It is a meat grinder that chews up men and spits out casualties at a rate that horrifies the American command. More than 12,000 American soldiers, sailors, and Marines lose their lives on this one island. The Japanese losses are even more staggering, with over 100,000 soldiers killed. This is the bloody arithmetic that will come to define the final phase of the war. Historians still debate the tactics used. Some argue that the American reliance on overwhelming firepower was a brutal but necessary response to the fanatical Japanese defense. Others contend that it led to unnecessary destruction and loss of civilian life. But for the men in charge of planning the next step, the invasion of Japan, the lesson of Okinawa was terrifyingly simple. If taking this one small island, just 60 miles long, cost so much, what would be the price for conquering the entire nation? The battle for Okinawa was over, but its ghost would haunt every decision made in the months to come. While the battle for Okinawa rages on the land, your war is being fought on the endless, shimmering expanse of the sea. You are a sailor on a destroyer, one of the so-called tin cans of the US Navy. Your ship isn't a mighty battleship or an aircraft carrier. You are part of the picket line, the thin ring of steel positioned miles ahead of the main fleet. Your job is simple and terrifying. You are the tripwire. You are there to detect and, if you can, stop the enemy before they can reach the high-value targets behind you. The days bleed into one another, a monotonous cycle of watch duty, drills, and the oppressive, humid heat of the Pacific. The sky above is a vast, empty blue, a beautiful canvas that you have come to dread, because you know that the danger will not come from the sea, but from that beautiful, empty sky. Then it happens. The alarm for general quarters rips through the ship's calm routine. A voice, strained with urgency, crackles over the intercom. Bogies, bogies, closing fast. Your heart hammers against your ribs as you scramble to your battle station, your eyes scanning the horizon. At first, you see nothing. Then, you spot them. Tiny black specks, like annoying gnats against the immensity of the sky. They are not flying in a disciplined formation like the bombers you have seen in training films. They fly with a kind of erratic, desperate energy. As one gets closer, you see it isn't a large, menacing bomber. It's a small, single-engine plane, laden with a bomb that seems too big for its frame, and it is flying directly at you. The air around you explodes into a cacophony of noise. The 5-inch guns fire with a deafening boom, while the smaller anti-aircraft cannons fill the sky with puffs of black smoke. You see tracers, like angry red wasps, reaching for the plane. But it keeps coming. It jinks and weaves through the wall of flak with a horrifying purpose. This is not a pilot trying to drop a bomb and escape. You realize, with a cold knot of dread in your stomach, that the pilot has no intention of escaping. The plane itself is the weapon. This is the divine wind, the Kamikaze. The name is a callback to a moment of near-mythological Japanese history, when a massive typhoon, a so-called divine wind, destroyed a Mongol invasion fleet in the 13th century, saving the nation. Now, Centuries later, the divine wind is made of young men in flying machines. The kamikaze attack is a weapon designed as much for the mind as it is for the ship's hull. It is psychological warfare in its purest form. Historians still argue about the strategic effectiveness of the kamikaze cause. Some see it as a desperate, wasteful tactic that squandered Japan's remaining experienced pilots. Others argue that, on a cost-benefit basis, it was brutally effective, inflicting enormous damage on the US Navy for a relatively small investment in older aircraft. Dozens of ships were sunk by these attacks, and thousands of American sailors were killed or wounded. But its true purpose was to instill a specific kind of fear. It was meant to communicate a message directly to the American psyche, that you were facing an enemy for whom death was not a failure, but a fulfillment of duty. It was another bloody data point, another piece of evidence suggesting that the Japanese people would not surrender. They would die, to the last man, woman, and child. The fear you felt on that destroyer was not born in the cockpit of a diving airplane. It was forged in rooms far away, in the heart of a Tokyo already scarred by conventional bombing. You can almost feel yourself there, a silent observer in the sweltering, unair-conditioned chambers where Japan's destiny is being decided. The men who gather here are the Supreme Council for the direction of the war, a group of 6 powerful figures who hold the fate of millions in their hands. They are a collection of aging generals, admirals, and politicians, their faces grim, their uniforms immaculate despite the oppressive summer heat. They are men trapped by a code of honor that has no vocabulary for the word surrender. To them, the fall of Nazi Germany isn't a cautionary tale. It is an example of weakness, a failure of spirit that they refuse to replicate. In these meetings, you don't hear pragmatic discussions about negotiated settlements or exit strategies. Instead, you hear the phrase ketsugo or decisive operation. This is the master plan for the defense of the homeland. It is not a plan for victory in the traditional sense. It is a plan for a bloodbath. The strategy is to make the initial American invasion so horrifically costly, to inflict such a staggering number of casualties in the first few weeks, that the American public's will to continue the fight will shatter. They are not trying to win the war anymore. They are trying to win the peace by making the cost of victory unpalatable for their enemy. It's a chillingly logical strategy, built on a foundation of fanatical resolve. The most terrifying part of this plan does not involve Japan's remaining armies. It involves its grandmothers, its shopkeepers, its children. The Council approves something called the National Resistance Program. This is not an exaggeration or a figure of speech. It is a literal plan to arm the entire civilian population. You see the reports, the directives being sent out to local prefectures. Citizens are being trained to fight, but not with modern weapons. There are not enough rifles to go around. Instead, they are being taught to strap explosives to their bodies and throw themselves under tanks. They are being issued sharpened bamboo spears, pitchforks, and whatever farming implements can be fashioned into a weapon. It almost sounds like a joke, the idea of facing down a Sherman tank with a pointy stick, but the intent is deadly serious. The government is preparing for a final, glorious act of national suicide, a concept they call gyukusai, or shattering of the jewel. Historians still debate how deep this sentiment truly ran. Was the entire population of Japan, 70 million people, really prepared to die in a final, suicidal charge? Or was this the ultimate form of propaganda from a military clique that had led the country to ruin and saw this as the only honorable way out? The evidence is complex. There were certainly millions who believed deeply in the emperor and the righteousness of their cause. But there were also millions more who were simply exhausted, starving, and terrified, caught between the Allied firebombs from the sky and their own government's demands for the ultimate sacrifice. This fortress mentality, this vision of a nation transformed into a single, massive suicide squad, is the reality confronting Allied war planners. The kamikazes were not an aberration, they were just the beginning. You are now half a world away from the desperate preparations in Japan, but the atmosphere is just as tense. You find yourself in a place without bamboo spears or civilian militias, but with its own kind of quiet terror. You are in a vast, sterile room deep within the Pentagon. The air hums with the low whisper of ventilation, a stark contrast to the sweltering heat of Tokyo. Here, the war is not a matter of spirit, but of logistics. It is a universe of paper, a sprawling city of ink on maps. And on these maps, the home islands of Japan have been dissected, analyzed, and marked for the largest and most complex military operation ever conceived by humankind. The response to Japan's Ketsugo has a name of its own. It is called Operation Downfall. The name itself feels heavy, a premonition of the gravity and finality of what is being planned. It makes D-Day, the invasion of Normandy, look like a dress rehearsal. The plan is so immense that it has to be broken into two separate, colossal pieces. The first part, you see on the maps, is codenamed Operation Olympic, scheduled for November 1945. It calls for the invasion of the southernmost main island. The goal is to seize a third of the island, to capture airfields that would then be used to support the next, even bigger invasion. You look at the troop requirements for this single operation. It involves nearly 800,000 soldiers and marines. This first step alone would have been the largest amphibious invasion in world history. But it was only the beginning. Once Kyushu's air bases were secured, the second phase would be launched months later, in the spring of 1946. This was Operation Coronet. Coronet was the death blow. It would be an invasion of the main island of Honshu, striking directly at the heart of the Japanese Empire on the Kanto Plain, the doorstep of Tokyo itself. Another 1.5 million men would be thrown into this second phase, bringing the total invasion force to well over 2 million. You trace the lines on the map, the arrows pointing to landing beaches, the circles indicating objectives. The sheer scale is difficult to wrap your mind around. It is a plan that involves thousands of ships, tens of thousands of aircraft, and an avalanche of logistics that stretches back across the entire Pacific Ocean. One of the most chillingly pragmatic details of this planning is often overlooked. In preparation for the expected casualties from Operation Downfall, the United States government manufactured an enormous stockpile of Purple Heart medals, the award given to wounded soldiers. They made so many, in fact, that the supply lasted through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and all the way to the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Historians still debate the ultimate feasibility of downfall. Some argue that the logistical strain and the political pressure at home from a war-weary public would have made the full-scale operation impossible to sustain. They suggest the plan might have collapsed under its own weight. But for now, in the summer of 1945, the plan is very real, and it sits on the desks of the men who must now begin the grim task of calculating its human cost. You are still in that room in the Pentagon, but the maps on the table seem to fade away. They are replaced by something far more stark and horrifying. Spreadsheets, columns of numbers. These are the documents that truly matter now. They are the butcher's bill for Operation Downfall. The men who created these documents were not ghouls. They were actuaries of war, tasked with the grim but necessary job of predicting the future in terms of human bodies. You look at the columns for American casualties. The numbers are so large they seem unreal. For Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, the estimates range from 250,000 to 500,000 casualties. Casualties, a sterile word that encompasses the killed, the wounded, and the missing. And that is just the first phase of the operation. For the full invasion, for both Olympic and Coronet combined, the numbers climb into a nightmarish realm. The Joint Chiefs of Staff projected that total American casualties could reach 1 million men. 1 million. You try to picture it. That is more than the total number of American combat deaths in every war of the 20th century combined up to that point. This is not a wild guess. It is a cold calculation based on the brutal lessons learned on those Pacific islands. The planners took the casualty rates from places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the percentage of men lost for every square mile of territory gained, and they extrapolated those figures to fit the immense scale of invading Japan itself. They knew how the Japanese fought. They knew about the caves, the tunnels, the absolute refusal to surrender. Okinawa was not a fluke. It was a preview of coming attractions. Then your eyes drift to the other side of the ledger. The projections for Japanese casualties. Here, the numbers become truly apocalyptic. The estimates for military deaths alone run into the millions. But it is the civilian number that catches in your throat. Because of the National Resistance Program, the plan to turn every citizen into a soldier with a bamboo spear, the planners had to assume that there would be no distinction between a combatant and a non-combatant. The invasion would not be a battle against an army. It would be the extermination of a society. Some estimates projected that Japanese deaths, both military and civilian, could reach as high as 10 million. 10 million people. It is a number so vast it loses all meaning. A figure that would make the horrors of the war in Europe pale in comparison. You can feel the crushing weight of these numbers settle upon your shoulders. This is the choice that has landed on the desk of the new American president, Harry S. Truman, a man who had only been in office for a few months, still trying to find his footing in the enormous shadow left by the legendary Franklin D. Roosevelt. He is faced with a decision that is almost biblical in its scale. Do you approve an invasion that will almost certainly cost 1 million of your own country's sons, and potentially 10 times that many of the enemy, including countless women and children? Historians still fiercely debate these projections. Some argue they were inflated after the war to make the use of a new, terrible weapon seem more palatable, more justified. Others maintain that, based on the intelligence at the time and the savagery of the fighting in the Pacific, these were the genuinely held fears of the men in charge. Regardless of the debate, this was the information the leaders had. This was the horrific problem they were trying to solve. They were caught in a trap, a mathematical equation written in blood. 1 million lives balanced against an unknown alternative. And somewhere, in a secret desert, that alternative was almost ready. To understand the alternative to that 1 million-man invasion, you must leave the cold, calculated world of the Pentagon in 1945. You need to travel back in time, back 6 years to the long, lazy summer of 1939. The world is simmering, on the verge of boiling over into a full-blown war, but for a moment, things are quiet. You find yourself on a peaceful porch on Long Island, New York. The air smells of salt marsh and cut grass. The man sitting here is perhaps the most famous scientist who has ever lived. His wild white hair has become a global icon for genius. His name is Albert Einstein. He is a gentle soul, a committed pacifist who fled the rising tide of Nazism in his native Germany. He came to America seeking peace, but on this quiet summer day, peace is the last thing he is going to find. He has visitors. The man leading the small delegation is a fellow physicist, a Hungarian named Leo Szilard. Szilard is a bundle of nervous energy and brilliant, forward-thinking anxiety. Years earlier, while waiting to cross a street in London, he had a terrifying epiphany. He was one of the first people on Earth to truly grasp the concept of a nuclear chain reaction. He understood that if you could split one atom and have it release energy and particles that would then split other atoms, you could unleash a power of unimaginable scale. It was an idea that he found so frightening he considered it a secret to be kept, not a discovery to be celebrated. An interesting, and perhaps telling, fun fact is that Szilard actually patented the idea of a nuclear reactor, but assigned the patent to the British Admiralty to keep it secret. He was a man who saw the future and was terrified by it. Now, in 1939, his worst fears were coming true. News had reached the scientific community that chemists in Nazi Germany had successfully achieved nuclear fission in a laboratory. They had split the uranium atom. The first step towards an atomic weapon had been taken, and it had been taken by the most dangerous regime on the planet. Szilard knew he had to warn the American government, but he was a nobody, a recent immigrant with a thick accent. He needed a voice that people would listen to. He needed Albert Einstein. So here he is, on this quiet porch, explaining to the world's most famous pacifist that he must help convince the President of the United States to build a bomb more terrible than anything ever imagined. Einstein, who had been largely disconnected from the latest research in nuclear physics, listened intently. At first, he didn't quite grasp the concept, but as Szilard explained the chain reaction, Einstein is said to have uttered a simple phrase: "I had not thought of that." The result of this meeting was a letter, drafted by Szilard but signed by Einstein, addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It gently warned of the possibility of extremely powerful bombs of a new type and suggested the US government might want to speed up its own research. Historians still debate the letter's true impact. Some say it was the single most important catalyst for the American bomb project. Others argue that it was just one of many nudges, and that the project would have started anyway. But the letter was delivered. A seed of terrifying potential had been planted in the highest office in the land. The letter from Einstein, with its quiet, almost academic warning, lands on the desk of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. You can imagine the scene. It's late 1939, and the president is juggling 1,000 different crises. The war in Europe is exploding, and the United States is officially neutral, but Roosevelt is maneuvering, trying to support the Allies without dragging a reluctant America into another global conflict. A letter from a physicist about a theoretical bomb. No matter how famous the physicist is, just one more piece of paper in a very large pile. The initial response is not a thunderclap of action, but a cautious, bureaucratic shuffle. A committee is formed, the Uranium Committee, a name that sounds more like a group of geologists than the architects of a superweapon. They are given a modest budget, just a few $1,000s, to look into the matter. For over 2 years, the idea of an American atomic bomb languishes in this state of suspended animation. It is a curiosity, a scientific possibility, but not yet a priority. Then, everything changes. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor catapults the United States into the war. Suddenly, everything that was theoretical becomes urgent. The fear that Germany or Japan might develop a nuclear weapon first is no longer a distant concern. It is an immediate, existential threat. The Uranium Committee is no longer sufficient. The project needs a leader, someone who can take a collection of academic theories and turn them into an industrial-scale weapon of war. And the man they choose is, in many ways, the polar opposite of the scientists he will soon command. His name is General Leslie Groves. You can picture General Groves perfectly. He is a large man, built like a bulldog, with a personality to match. He is not a brilliant scientist or a charismatic battlefield commander. He is an engineer, a master builder, a man who gets things done, no matter the cost or the obstacles. His most recent accomplishment was overseeing the construction of a massive new headquarters for the War Department. A 5-sided building you might have heard of called the Pentagon. He built it ahead of schedule and under budget. Groves is a man who understands logistics, concrete, and chain of command. When he is told he is being put in charge of this top-secret bomb project, he is deeply disappointed. He wanted a combat command overseas, a chance for glory on the battlefield. Instead, he's being handed what he considers a fringe science experiment. But it is precisely Groves's no-nonsense, take-charge attitude that the project so desperately needs. He arrives like a hurricane of military efficiency into the quiet, tweed-jacketed world of academic physics. He doesn't care about scientific debates or theoretical possibilities. He wants results, and he wants them yesterday. He is given a virtually unlimited budget and the highest priority rating in the entire war effort. He has the power to cut through any red tape, to seize any land, to acquire any materials he needs without question. The project, which had been drifting for years, suddenly has a powerful engine. It is officially codenamed the Manhattan Engineer District, a deliberately boring name designed to attract as little attention as possible. It would later become known simply as the Manhattan Project. Historians still argue about Groves's leadership style. Many scientists found him arrogant and overbearing, but few dispute that without his ruthless drive and organizational genius, the project may never have succeeded in time. The secret project now had its commander. Now it needed to build its secret empire. General Groves now has a mission, a budget, and a mandate from the president. But a bomb does not simply spring into existence from a sheer act of will. It needs fuel, and not just any fuel. The scientists have told him that they need one of two incredibly rare and difficult to produce materials. The first is a specific type of uranium, called uranium-235. The problem is that in any chunk of natural uranium dug from the ground, more than 99% of it is the wrong kind, a stable, almost boring version, called U-238. Getting enough of the explosive, U-235 requires a separation process, so fantastically difficult it's like trying to pull a single specific grain of sand from a vast beach. The second option is a brand new, man-made element called plutonium. Plutonium doesn't exist in nature. You have to create it, atom by atom, inside a newfangled device called a nuclear reactor. Groves, the master engineer, understands the challenge not in terms of physics, but in terms of industry. He needs factories, giant, unprecedented factories, and he needs to build them in total secrecy. So you watch as Groves, a man who just built the world's largest office building, begins to build something far more audacious. He builds entire cities from scratch, hidden away from the prying eyes of the world. First, you find yourself in the rolling, muddy hills of eastern Tennessee. Here, the government quietly acquires a huge 50-9-1000-acre parcel of land. Thousands of families, many of whom had lived on that land for generations, are given a few weeks' notice to pack up and leave. Then, an army of construction workers descends, and a secret city begins to rise from the red clay. It is called Oak Ridge. At its peak, it will house 75,000 people, making it the fifth largest city in the state, yet it will not appear on any public map. You see enormous, windowless buildings being constructed. One of them, the K-25 plant, is over a mile long, the largest building under a single roof anywhere in the world at the time. Inside these vast buildings, thousands of people work around the clock, operating complex panels of dials and gauges. The vast majority of them have no idea what they are actually doing. They are told their work is vital to the war effort, but the final product is a complete mystery. It's the ultimate example of a need-to-know basis. One of the most successful groups of operators were the so-called Calitron girls, young women, many just out of high school, who proved to be remarkably adept at monitoring the complex equipment used to separate the uranium isotopes. They just did their job, no questions asked. The whole city is surrounded by fences and armed guards, with signs everywhere reminding residents of the need for silence. At the same time, another secret city is being built on the other side of the country. You are now in the desolate, windswept desert of Washington state. Here, on a remote stretch of land along the Columbia River, Groves builds the Hanford site. This is where the other fuel, plutonium, will be created. You see 3 massive nuclear reactors being constructed, the first industrial-scale reactors in history. They are colossal grey cubes, monuments to a new and fearsome technology. They use the cold water of the river to cool their atomic hearts as they transmute ordinary uranium into the stuff of bombs. Like Oak Ridge, the work is shrouded in secrecy. The project is a success. By 1945, these hidden cities are producing a steady trickle of the exotic materials needed for a weapon. Historians now grapple with the complex legacy of these sites, particularly Hanford, which became a location of significant environmental contamination that is still being cleaned up today. But at the time, there was only one goal. The fuel was ready. Now they needed a place to assemble the puzzle. The fuel is now flowing. a slow but steady stream of U-235 from the hills of Tennessee, and a trickle of brand new plutonium from the deserts of Washington. But these materials are just inert, heavy metals. They are the ingredients for a recipe that doesn't yet exist. You need a place to write that recipe, a kitchen where the world's greatest scientific chefs can figure out how to combine these exotic ingredients into a meal of unimaginable power. General Groves knows he cannot build the bomb in a university lab or a city factory. The secrecy must be absolute. He needs a place that is remote, isolated, and secure. He needs a place where he can gather the finest minds in the Allied world and lock them away until they solve the problem. His search leads him to you, or rather, it leads you to a place that will become your whole world. You are standing on a high, flat-topped mountain of rock, a mesa, in the starkly beautiful landscape of northern New Mexico. The air is thin and crisp, and the sky is a brilliant, endless blue. Below you, the desert floor stretches out in a panorama of ochre and sagebrush. This is the Parato Plateau. It is a place of profound silence and ancient history, a world away from the frantic energy of wartime America, and it's perfect. The choice of this specific spot is a curious bit of history. The man Groves has chosen to be the scientific director of this new laboratory. A brilliant physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer knew this place well. He had spent time here as a young man, riding horses and exploring the rugged landscape. He loved it. The site itself was home to the Los Alamos Ranch School, a rustic institution that taught boys academics alongside outdoor survival skills. Oppenheimer suggested it to Groves, and Groves, seeing its natural isolation and defensibility, agreed. The school was bought, the students sent home, and the world's most secret laboratory was born. You watch as the place is transformed. The quiet ranch school is swallowed up by a whirlwind of military construction. Army engineers arrive and hastily build a small, self-contained town. You see prefabricated houses, barracks, laboratories, and workshops rising from the dust. The entire mesa is fenced off, surrounded by barbed wire, and patrolled by armed guards. It is a strange hybrid, a place that feels like a university campus, a frontier boomtown, and a high-security prison all at once. The scientists begin to arrive, one by one, recruited in secret from universities and research labs across the country and from among the Allied nations. They are physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and engineers, many of them already Nobel laureates or future ones. Life here is a study in contrasts. By day, you are engaged in work at the very edge of human knowledge, wrestling with the fundamental forces of the universe. By night, you live in a muddy, chaotic town with a failing water supply and a chronic housing shortage. It is a place of incredible intellectual ferment, but also intense personal strain. Families are isolated, mail is censored, and no one is allowed to tell their relatives where they are or what they are doing. Historians still explore the unique psychology of Los Alamos. Did this intense, shared isolation create a powerful bond that accelerated discovery? Or did it create a kind of groupthink, a moral echo chamber where the terrifying implications of the work were easier to ignore? One thing was certain. This dusty mesa was now the intellectual and practical center of the project. It was the brain, the place where the ghost of an idea would finally be given a body of steel and plutonium. At the center of this strange new world on the mesa, you see a man who seems almost out of place, yet completely in command. He is not a stern military figure like General Groves. In fact, he appears almost fragile. You see a tall, unnervingly thin figure, often draped in a suit that seems a size too big for his wiry frame. His face is all sharp angles and intensity, dominated by a pair of piercing blue eyes that seem to see right through you. A pork pie hat is often perched on his head, and a cigarette seems to be a permanent extension of his hand. This is J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man chosen to be the scientific director of this monumental undertaking. To put it simply, he is the brain of the brain. He is the intellectual engine driving the entire Los Alamos laboratory. Oppenheimer is a paradox. He is a theoretical physicist, a man most comfortable in the abstract world of quantum mechanics and cosmic rays. Yet here, he proves to be a masterful leader and administrator. You watch him as he moves through the labs, a whirlwind of intellectual energy. He has a unique, almost magical ability to understand every aspect of the project, from the most esoteric physics equations to the most practical engineering challenges. He can talk to the explosives experts, the chemists, the metallurgists, and the mathematicians, all in their own scientific languages. He is the human hub, the central processing unit that connects all the brilliant, eccentric, and often competitive minds that have been gathered on this mountain. He is, as one colleague would later say, an intellectual centralist, a man who took an almost hedonistic pleasure in understanding new ideas. But this man, so vital to the project, was also considered its greatest security risk. You can feel the constant tension between him and the military command. General Groves, in his memoirs, called the decision to appoint Oppenheimer a calculated risk. It was an understatement. Oppenheimer's past was a security officer's nightmare. He had numerous friends and even family members with known communist sympathies. His own political leanings before the war were decidedly left-wing. He was a man of deep and complex emotions, known for his moody, sometimes self-destructive, behavior. An obscure but telling fact about his immense intellect is that he once learned Dutch in just 6 weeks so that he could deliver a series of technical lectures in the Netherlands. Yet, this same man was considered by some to be dangerously unstable. Historians still debate the very essence of Oppenheimer's character. Was he a patriot, driven by a desperate fear that Nazi Germany would build the bomb first? A man who saw this as a terrible but necessary duty? Or was he a man of boundless ambition, who saw in this project the ultimate stage on which to prove his genius, a chance to achieve a kind of scientific immortality? The truth, as it often is likely a complex mixture of both. He was a man who loved the poetry of John Donne and read the ancient Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, in its original Sanskrit. He was a humanist in charge of building the most inhuman weapon ever conceived. He was the indispensable man, the charismatic, conflicted, and brilliant soul of a project that was racing to create a new kind of fire. You are now deep inside the wire, a member of the secret tribe of Los Alamos. Under Oppenheimer's dizzying leadership, the monumental task begins. The fuel is coming, but how do you turn this rare, miraculous metal into a weapon? It quickly becomes clear to you and the other scientists that you are not just building one bomb. You are forced to pursue two completely different paths at the same time, two separate, parallel projects, each with its own unique and formidable challenges. This is because the two types of nuclear fuel you have, uranium-235 and plutonium, behave like two entirely different animals. They require two very different kinds of cages to unleash their power. The decision to pursue both paths at once is one of the most critical of the entire project, effectively doubling the workload but also doubling the chances of success. The first path is for the uranium-235 arriving from Oak Ridge. This design is what you might call the brute force method. It is a gun, a very simple, very powerful gun. You can almost sketch it on a napkin. You take one piece of U-235 that is not big enough to start a chain reaction on its own, a subcritical mass. Then you take another subcritical piece. You place one at the end of a gun barrel, and you use conventional explosives to fire the other piece, the bullet, down the barrel to slam into the target. When they collide, they form a single piece that is large enough to go supercritical, and in a fraction of a second, the atomic chain reaction begins. The design is straightforward, almost primitive in its logic. It is considered so reliable, so certain to work, that the scientists decide they won't even need to conduct a full-scale test before using it. This uranium gun design would eventually be nicknamed Little Boy. The second path, for the plutonium coming from Hanford, is infinitely more complex. In early 1944, the scientists make a terrifying discovery. They find that the plutonium being bred in the reactors is not as pure as they had hoped. It contains a contaminant, an isotope called plutonium-240, that makes it far too unstable for the simple gun design. It's too hot, too ready to fission. If you tried to shoot one piece of this plutonium into another, it would start to react too early, before the pieces were fully joined. It would fizzle, blowing itself apart in a relatively small explosion before the real, devastating chain reaction could get going. This discovery sends a wave of panic through the laboratory. The simple gun method is a dead end for plutonium. A new, far more radical idea is needed. The new idea is called implosion. It is one of the most challenging engineering problems ever attempted. The concept is to take a single subcritical sphere of plutonium and squeeze it from all sides at exactly the same time, with such immense uniform pressure that you compress the plutonium atoms themselves, forcing them closer together until the sphere becomes soup. To do this, you would have to surround the plutonium core with a sphere of perfectly shaped high explosives, and then figure out how to detonate all of those explosives simultaneously, creating a perfectly symmetrical shockwave that focuses inward. It is like trying to crush a grapefruit into the size of a marble without any dents. This fantastically complex device, the plutonium implosion bomb, would earn the nickname Fat Man. Historians still marvel at the audacity of this concept. The scientists were not just building a bomb, they were venturing into entirely new realms of physics and engineering, all on a desperately tight timeline. The simple uranium gun is a comfort. You see its design, and it makes sense. It's a problem of mechanics, of getting one piece to hit another. But now, you stand before the great puzzle, the challenge that threatens to derail half of the entire project. The problem of implosion. It is a concept so audacious, so counterintuitive, that it feels less like engineering and more like black magic. You are no longer dealing with a simple bullet. You are trying to command the very nature of an explosion, to bend its chaotic, outward force into a perfectly controlled, inward crushing embrace. The blackboard in front of you is covered in a nightmare of equations, a frantic attempt to describe a perfect, spherical shockwave. The slightest imperfection, a timing error of a millionth of a second, or a flaw in the explosive charge, no bigger than a grain of sand, and the entire device will fail. The precious sphere of plutonium at its heart will be squeezed unevenly, squirting out the side like a grape crushed carelessly in a fist. The solution, when it emerges, is one of the most elegant and ingenious pieces of wartime science. The idea is to create something called an explosive lens. You have seen how a glass lens can take scattered rays of light and focus them to a single, intense point. Now, you must do the same, but with the raw brute force of a chemical explosion. You watch as the engineers and chemists, led by a brilliant and flamboyant Harvard professor named George Kistiakowski, begin working with two different types of explosives, one that detonates very quickly, and one that burns much more slowly. They begin casting these explosives into carefully shaped blocks, like fitting together the pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle to form a perfect sphere. The outer layer is the fast explosive, and the inner layer is the slow one. The theory is that when you detonate the outer layer, the faster shockwave will race through the first explosive. When it hits the slower explosive, it's like a fast runner hitting a patch of mud. The shockwave slows down, and because of the precise, curved shape of the interface between the two explosives, the wave is bent, reshaped, and directed inwards. You need dozens of these lenses, fitted together perfectly around the plutonium core, a soccer ball of shaped charges, and you need to detonate them all, at precisely the same microsecond, with a complex web of wires and capacitors that looks like a metallic spider's web. The precision required is staggering, far beyond anything ever attempted. You see Kistiakowski, a man who had fought against the Bolsheviks in the Russian Civil War, now betting his reputation and the fate of the project on his ability to tame high explosives. His team conducts endless tests in the remote canyons of the Mesa, setting off small-scale explosions and trying to analyze the results. It is dangerous, frustrating work. An amusing but true detail is Kistiakowsky's sheer confidence. He famously made a bet with Oppenheimer for $10 against his entire month's salary that his explosive lens system would work on the first try. Historians still regard the successful development of the implosion device as the single greatest technical achievement of Los Alamos. Without it, the vast industrial complex at Hanford, which was producing all the plutonium, would have been a colossal waste of time and money. The great puzzle was still in pieces, but you could now see how they might, just might, fit together. You have been living and breathing this project for months, maybe years. The isolation, the long hours, the intense pressure have become your normal. But through it all, there has been a single, unifying thought that gets you through the day. A single image that fuels your work. It is the image of a swastika painted on the side of a bomb. The entire purpose of this secret city on a mesa, from the first anxious conversation on Einstein's porch to the frantic efforts to solve the implosion puzzle, was born from one terrifying idea: that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis might get this weapon first. Many of the scientists here, including Oppenheimer himself, are Jewish. Others are refugees who fled fascism in Europe. For you, this is not just a scientific challenge, it is a moral crusade. You are in a race, a desperate, high-stakes race, against an enemy you believe to be the very embodiment of evil. But now, as the winter of 1944 gives way to the spring of 1945, a new reality begins to filter through the barbed wire fences of Los Alamos. The news from Europe is no longer about a desperate struggle, but about an inevitable victory. The Allied armies are closing in on Berlin from all sides. The Nazi war machine is collapsing. Then, on May 8, 1945, the news you have been fighting for finally arrives. Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over. The race has been won. You can feel a wave of relief wash over the community, but it is followed by a profound and unsettling sense of confusion. The enemy is gone. The original justification for everything you have done, for all the sacrifice and secrecy, has vanished overnight. You walk through the muddy streets of the town and you can feel the change in the atmosphere. The moral certainty that once propelled the project is now replaced by a quiet, nagging question. What are we doing this for now? For some, the answer is clear. A brilliant Polish physicist named Joseph Rotblat, who had joined the project out of fear of a Nazi bomb, sees no further justification for his work. Believing the project would be abandoned, he packs his bags and resigns. The only top-tier scientist to walk away from Los Alamos for reasons of conscience before the bomb was used. He would later go on to win a Nobel Peace Prize for his work against nuclear proliferation, but Rotblat is the exception. For the vast majority, and for the military leadership, the project does not slow down, it accelerates. The enormous machine that General Groves has built, the secret cities, the thousands of workers, the billions of dollars spent, has a momentum all its own. It is a train that cannot be stopped. The target simply shifts. The enemy is no longer a ghost in a Berlin bunker. The enemy is now the Japanese Empire, the fanatical resistance, the kamikazes, and the horrifying casualty estimates for Operation Downfall. Historians still fiercely debate this critical turning point. Was the continued development of the bomb a pragmatic choice to end the war in the Pacific and save lives? Or was it a classic case of what they call technological momentum? The idea that once a technology is created, an overwhelming institutional pressure builds to use it, to justify the immense investment. The race against a ghost enemy was over. A new race had begun, a race against the clock, to build the weapon before the first ships of the Downfall invasion fleet set sail for the beaches of Japan. The moral calculus may have shifted, but the scientific imperative has not. The uranium gun, little boy, is a simple and reliable design. You are confident it will work. But the implosion device, the Fat Man, is a temperamental beast, a complex puzzle of explosives and physics that has consumed the best minds on the mesa for a year. It is still just a theory, a beautiful and terrifying collection of equations on a blackboard. Before you can hand this new kind of fire to the generals, you have to know if it will even light. There is only one way to find out. You must build one, take it to a remote corner of the world, and see what happens. You must poke the dragon to see if it breathes fire. The decision is made. The plutonium implosion device will be tested. You leave the familiar, muddy chaos of the Los Alamos Mesa and travel 200 miles south. The journey takes you into the heart of the New Mexico desert, to a vast, empty basin of searing heat and scrubland. The Spanish conquistadors who first passed through this desolate valley centuries ago gave it a name that you find both poetic and deeply unsettling. They called it the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man. It is here, in this place of historical despair, that you will prepare the stage for a new sun. The test is given a code name, a choice made by Oppenheimer himself. He calls it Trinity. The name is an obscure and beautiful reference, likely inspired by the holy sonnets of his beloved poet, John Donne, whose work includes the line, "Batter my heart, three-personed God." It is a strangely spiritual name for such a profoundly material event. The center of this dead man's journey is a single, lonely point on the map. Here, you see a steel tower rising 100 feet into the desert sky. It looks almost flimsy, a simple structure of metal beams that seems inadequate for the cosmic passenger it is about to carry. At the base of this tower, in a clean room assembled inside an old ranch house, the final, delicate assembly of the weapon takes place. The scientists, working with the tension of surgeons performing a life-or-death operation, carefully bring together the components. You watch as the precisely shaped explosive lenses are fitted into place, forming a perfect sphere, and at its heart, the core of the device, two gleaming silver-plated hemispheres of plutonium, warm to the touch from their own radioactivity, are carefully joined. This is the gadget, as it is known. Miles away from the tower, you see 3 concrete bunkers being dug into the earth, their roofs reinforced with dirt and timber. This is where the scientists and military observers will watch the show. A web of wires, like a nervous system, connects the gadget on the tower back to the control bunker, ready to carry the final signal. Historians still debate the true purpose of the Trinity test. Was it simply a necessary scientific experiment to validate an unproven design? Or was it also a political act, a demonstration of unimaginable power timed to coincide with a high-stakes meeting between President Truman, Winston Churchill, and the new adversary on the world stage, Joseph Stalin? The preparations continue. Everything that human ingenuity can control is now in place. But there is one thing you cannot control, a force of nature that is now gathering on the horizon, threatening to ruin the entire performance. The gadget sits on its 100-foot throne, a silent, patient guard of steel and plutonium. The final preparations are complete. The stage is set, but as evening falls over the Jornada del Muerto, an uninvited guest arrives. It starts subtly. The air, which had been dry and clear all day, becomes thick, heavy, and humid. You see clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and bruised, piling up on one another with an ominous speed. This is not the gentle rain you might welcome in a parched land. This is the raw, violent energy of a southwestern thunderstorm, and it is heading directly for you. The original plan was to detonate the bomb at 4 in the morning, in the pre-dawn darkness. But as the night deepens, that plan seems to be dissolving into a torrent of rain and a fury of lightning. You are in the control bunker, miles from the tower, but the atmosphere inside is as turbulent as the weather outside. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of ozone from the humming electronic equipment. The men who built this device, who understand its power better than anyone, are now at the mercy of a simple weather pattern. General Groves is furious. He paces back and forth, his formidable presence making the small bunker feel even more cramped. He keeps demanding updates from the chief meteorologist, a man named Jack Hubbard, who has the most stressful job in the world right now. Hubbard, using weather balloons and the best, though still primitive, forecasting technology of his day keeps pushing back the go time, first to 4:30, then to 5. The tension is unbearable. You can feel the frustration. Years of work, billions of dollars, the hopes and fears of a nation, all held hostage by a cloud, and the dangers are very real. A direct lightning strike on the steel tower could, in a worst-case scenario, trigger the complex conventional explosives. The result would not be a nuclear blast, but it would scatter tons of lethally radioactive plutonium across the desert, creating a permanent zone of death and rendering the entire test site unusable. An even greater fear is the rain itself. If the bomb detonates during the storm, the radioactive fallout, the cloud of vaporized earth and weapon debris, could be washed out of the sky by the rain, concentrating in deadly hotspots over the observation bunkers, or, even worse, drifting over nearby civilian towns. Historians still debate just how close they came to canceling the test. Some accounts portray a scene of near panic, with scientists desperately urging Groves to postpone, fearing a radiological disaster. Other accounts suggest Groves, a man of immense and stubborn will, was determined to see the test through, believing that any delay would be a sign of weakness to the politicians waiting for the result. You see Oppenheimer, a chain of cigarettes his only companion, pacing nervously, his thin frame silhouetted by the flashes of lightning outside. He is a man caught between his own creation and a force of nature he cannot control. The storm rages for hours, the wind howls, and then, slowly, miraculously, the storm begins to break. The rain slackens to a drizzle. The lightning moves off into the distance. A window of calm appears in the forecast. At 5:10 a.m., the final decision is made. The countdown will proceed. The storm has passed. It leaves behind a world washed clean, the desert air scrubbed of dust, and now filled with a strange, electric calm. The decision is made, and the machinery of the countdown, once paused, now engages with an inexorable finality. You are lying on the ground, your face turned towards the distant steel tower that you can no longer see in the pre-dawn gloom. You have been given a piece of welder's glass, a dark square meant to protect your eyes from a light no human has ever witnessed. The instructions are clear. Lie with your feet toward the tower, and when the moment comes, shield your eyes. The voice of the controller crackles over the radio speakers scattered around the bunker, a calm, dispassionate metronome marking the final minutes of the old world. T-minus 20 minutes. The minutes stretch and compress, a strange new kind of time. Every second is an eternity, yet the minutes fly by with terrifying speed. You see the scientists around you, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light. These are the most brilliant minds of a generation, men who have wrestled with the fundamental laws of the cosmos, and now they are reduced to nervous, silent anticipation, just like you. A few miles away, in the control bunker, Oppenheimer grips a support post to steady himself. His breath is shallow, his face a mask of unbearable tension. General Groves, ever the pragmatist, is more concerned with the practicalities of failure than the philosophical implications of success. He is thinking about his report to the president. You glance over at a young, brilliantly eccentric physicist named Richard Feynman. He scoffs at the dark welder's glass. He has done a quick calculation in his head and decided the glass is useless. It will block everything. He has convinced himself that the only real danger is the ultraviolet radiation, and he believes the glass windshield of a nearby army truck will filter that out perfectly. So he makes a decision. He will be the only person to watch the birth of this new sun without dark glasses, peeking from the relative safety of a truck cab. It is a moment of pure, unapologetic scientific curiosity in the face of the apocalypse. It is a small, human detail in a moment that feels utterly inhuman. The radio voice continues its steady, relentless march. T-minus 2 minutes. A final automated sequence begins. The complex web of switches and capacitors that surrounds the gadget is now being charged. The air seems to hum with a new energy. This is it. There is no turning back. Historians still debate the thoughts that filled these men's minds in these final seconds. Was it a prayer for success, a terror of failure, or a sudden, dawning comprehension of the terrifying moral line they were about to cross? The voice on the radio reaches the end. T-minus 10 seconds. 98765 43210. A single final click echoes from the radio, and for a fraction of a second, there is only silence. The final click of the radio is followed by a silence so profound it feels like the universe is holding its breath. For a moment that stretches into a small eternity, nothing happens. You are lying in the cool desert sand, staring into the darkness, and a thought flickers through your mind. It failed. All this effort, all this fear, for nothing. And then, the world is erased. It is not a sound, it is not a pressure wave, it is simply light. A flash of light that is not on the horizon, but is the horizon. A light that is not in the sky, but is the sky. It is as if someone has replaced the entire world with the core of a star. You feel it on your skin, a sudden, radiant warmth, like opening the door of a blast furnace, even from miles away. The light is not white. It is every color and no color at once. A searing violet purple that floods your consciousness, and then bleaches instantly to a white, so absolute it has no texture, no dimension. Through the welder's glass, you see it. A rapidly growing hemisphere of fire, anchored to the desert floor. It is a living thing, a violent sphere of sunstuff, boiling and churning with an internal rage. It is ugly and beautiful and terrifying all at once. The fireball begins to rise, detaching itself from the ground, pulling a thick column of dust and debris up with it. It slowly morphs, swelling into the iconic, terrifying shape that will haunt the dreams of the world for generations to come. The mushroom cloud. It climbs higher and higher, into the stratosphere, its top shearing off in the high-altitude winds. You see it glow with an internal, hellish light, a mixture of orange, red, and angry purple. Where the steel tower once stood, there is now nothing but a crater of incandescent heat. The desert sand in that crater has been fused by the unimaginable temperature into a new, glassy, green mineral. A substance that will later be named trinitite, the first mineral on Earth created by human hands that was not of this Earth. And still, there is only silence. The spectacle unfolds in a ghostly, dreamlike quiet. Your brain struggles to connect what you are seeing with what you are hearing, which is nothing. It is a silent movie of the apocalypse. Minutes seem to pass. Then, the sound arrives. It is not a single bang. It is a physical assault, a deep, guttural roar that slams into you, a wave of pure pressure that you feel in the marrow of your bones. The sound is a tangible thing, a concussion that rolls across the desert floor and then crashes against the distant mountains, echoing back as a long, rolling thunder that seems to go on forever. It is the sound of the sky being torn in half. Historians still discuss the immediate scientific aftermath, how the stunned physicists, even in their shock, immediately began their frantic calculations, trying to gauge the bomb's yield based on the brightness of the flash and the force of the blast wave. The silent movie has ended. The full, brutal reality has arrived. The dawn of the atomic age has come, not with a whisper, but with a roar that shakes the very foundations of the world. The thunderous echo of the blast finally fades, rolling away into the distant mountains, leaving behind a ringing in your ears and a silence that feels heavier, more profound than the one before. The spectacle is over. The great beast has roared, and now a strange new morning is breaking over the journey of the dead man. You push yourself up from the ground, your muscles stiff, your mind reeling. The air smells of ozone and scorched earth. The mushroom cloud, now miles high, is beginning to dissipate, a ghostly radioactive stain against the pale blue of the coming dawn. You look around at the faces of your fellow observers. What you see is a complex, almost shocking, tapestry of human emotion. This is the moment where scientific curiosity collides with its own terrible consequences. You see some men cheering. They are shouting, shaking hands, pounding each other on the back. It is the pure, unadulterated joy of success. They are engineers, technicians, and scientists who have spent years wrestling with a problem that everyone said was impossible, and they have won. The gadget worked. The implosion was a success. The explosive lenses focused perfectly. Their creation did not fizzle, it roared. You see General Groves, his face beaming. For him, this is the ultimate vindication. His massive, impossibly expensive project has delivered. He has his weapon. His relief is palpable, the satisfaction of a master builder who has just completed his magnum opus. But then you turn and see the others. Their faces are not filled with joy. They are pale, slack-jawed, their eyes still fixed on the horizon where the fireball once was. They are staring into the abyss they have just opened. You see Kenneth Bainbridge, the physicist in charge of the entire test, a man known for his calm and composure. He walks over to Oppenheimer, and you hear him say something low and bitter. "Now we are all sons of bitches." The words hang in the air, a stark and brutal epitaph for the moment of triumph. It is the precise moment when the elation of scientific achievement curdles into the nausea of moral responsibility. And then you look at Oppenheimer himself. The intellectual father of this new son is not celebrating. He is leaning against a post, his face a ghostly white. His famously expressive blue eyes seem hollow, vacant. He is not seeing the cheering men or the dissipating cloud. He is seeing something else, something from his deep reading of ancient texts. Years later, he would describe the thought that flashed through his mind in that moment, a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. As the god Vishnu reveals his multi-armed terrifying form, he declares, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This is the legacy Oppenheimer sees for himself, not as a victorious scientist, but as a harbinger of doom. Historians still debate the emotional reality of that moment. How many truly felt that deep, immediate dread, and how many were simply caught up in the exhilaration of a successful experiment? But for the men at the heart of the project, the line had been crossed. The impossible had been made real. Awe, relief, and a terrible world-changing fear now hung in the desert air, waiting for a car to take them back to civilization. The cars bounce along the rough desert track, taking you away from the journey of the dead man. The journey back to Los Alamos is a quiet one. There is no cheering now. The adrenaline of the past few hours has been replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and something else, something heavier. The men you are with, the scientists who have just unlocked the power of a star, are now just tired men in dusty cars, blinking in the new morning light. They carry with them the greatest secret on Earth, a knowledge that separates them from the rest of humanity. Back at the test site, the official cover story is already being prepared. The public will be told that a large ammunition magazine accidentally exploded. It's a plausible, mundane lie to cover up a cosmic truth. Half a world away, in the war-torn city of Potsdam, Germany, President Harry Truman is sitting across a table from Winston Churchill and the formidable, stony-faced leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. He is the new man at the table, still finding his footing, still wrestling with the terrible arithmetic of Operation Downfall, the million American casualties his generals have told him to expect. Then, a coded message arrives for him. It is from his Secretary of War. The message is short and cryptic. Operated on this morning. Diagnosis not yet complete, but results seem satisfactory and already exceed expectations. Truman understands immediately. The gadget worked. The beast is real. He now holds a card in his hand that no leader in human history has ever possessed. You can feel the shift in the global balance of power right there in that room. Truman, it is said, became much more confident, more assertive in his dealings with Stalin after receiving the news. He casually mentioned to the Soviet dictator that the United States had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin, a man who was no stranger to secrets and brutality, showed little interest, a reaction that has been the subject of intense historical debate ever since. Some historians believe Stalin was genuinely unimpressed. Others argue that his own spies had already informed him about the Manhattan Project. and he was simply playing his own cards close to his chest, feigning indifference. The scientists on the mesa are now in a new and terrible position. Their work is done, they have succeeded, but in doing so, they have become like the sorcerer's apprentice, men who have summoned a power they cannot control. Some of them, led by the same Leo Szilard, who had started it all with his letter to Einstein, had already tried to warn the government, begging for a demonstration of the bomb on an unpopulated area first, rather than using it on a city full of people. They were now merely advisors, their creation handed over to leaders who had to weigh its power against the bloody alternative of invasion. The choice was no longer theirs to make. In the blinding flash of the Trinity test, humanity had successfully harnessed the power of a star. The weapon was ready, but the scientists who created it were about to hand their terrible discovery over to leaders facing an impossible choice. And so our story for tonight comes to a gentle close. The echoes of that first atomic dawn have faded, leaving behind the quiet of the present moment. The great forces of history, the decisions that shaped our world, can now be allowed to rest, to settle back into the soft pages of the past. You can let go of the tension of the countdown, the brilliant flash in the desert, and the heavy weight of the choices that followed. All of that is far away now, a distant story from a different time. Your only task now is to feel the quiet comfort of the room around you, to notice the gentle weight of the blankets and the softness of the pillow beneath your head. The world outside can continue on its busy way, but your world, right here and now, is one of peace and stillness. Allow your thoughts to drift and soften, like clouds dissipating in a calm sky. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to solve. All that is required is to breathe, to feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath, a quiet and reassuring anchor in the peaceful darkness. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are drifting towards a deep and restorative rest. The end. Sweet dreams.